Welcome to Shadowed Tales Archive. Tonight, we invite you to descend into darkness with a chilling anthology of horror stories. This is episode 40. Let the nightmare begin. The Whispering Cabinet. During September of 2001, I attended an estate sale in Portland, Oregon. The items liquidated at this sale were from the estate of a woman who had passed away at the age of 103. A granddaughter of the woman told me that her grandmother had been born in Poland, where she grew up, married, raised a family, and lived until she was sent to a Nazi concentration camp during World War II. She was the only member of her family who survived the camp. Her parents, brothers, a sister, husband, and 2 sons and a daughter were all killed. She survived the camp by escaping with some other prisoners and somehow making her way to Spain, where she lived until the end of the war. I was told that she acquired the small wine cabinet listed here in Spain, and it was one of only 3 items that she brought with her when she immigrated to the United States. The other 2 items were a steamer trunk and a sewing box. I purchased the wine cabinet, along with the sewing box and some other furniture at the estate sale. After the sale, I was approached by the woman's granddaughter who said, "I see you got the Whispering Cabinet." She was referring to the wine cabinet. I asked her what a whispering cabinet was, and she told me that when she was growing up, her grandmother always kept the wine cabinet in her sewing room. It was always shut and set in a place that was out of reach. The grandmother always called it the Whispering Cabinet. When the girl asked her grandmother what was inside, her grandmother spit 3 times through her fingers and said, "A Divik and Kesselim." The grandmother went on to tell the girl that the wine cabinet was never, ever to be opened. The granddaughter told me that her grandmother had asked that the box be buried with her. However, as such a request was contrary to the rules of an Orthodox Jewish burial, the grandmother's request had not been honored. I asked the granddaughter what a Divik and Kesselim were, but she did not know. I asked if she would like to open it with me. She did not want to open it, as her grandmother had been very emphatic and serious when she instructed her not to do so, and regardless of the reason, she wanted to honor her grandmother's request. I finally ended up offering to let her keep what seemed to me to be a sentimental keepsake. At that point, she was very insistent and said, No, you bought it." I explained that I didn't want my money back, and that it would make me feel better to do what I thought was an act of kindness. She then became somewhat upset. Looking back now, the way she became upset was just plain odd. She raised her voice to me and said, "You bought it. You made a deal." When I tried to speak, she yelled, "We don't want it." She began to cry, asked me to leave, and quickly walked away. I wrote the whole episode off to the stress and grief she must have been experiencing. I took my purchases and politely left. At the time when I bought the cabinet, I owned a small furniture refinishing business. I took the cabinet to my store and put it in my basement workshop where I intended to refinish it and give it as a gift to my mother. I didn't think anything more about it. I opened my shop for the day and went to run some errands, leaving the young woman who did sales for me in charge. After about a half hour, I got a call on my cell phone. The call was from my salesperson. She was absolutely hysterical and screaming that someone was in my workshop breaking glass and swearing. Furthermore, the intruder had locked the iron security gates and the emergency exit, and she couldn't get out. As I told her to call the police, my cell phone battery went dead. I hit speeds of 100 miles per hour getting back to the shop. When I arrived, I found the gates locked. I went inside and found my employee on the floor in a corner of my office, sobbing hysterically. I ran to the basement and went downstairs. At the bottom of the stairs, I was hit by an overpowering, unmistakable odor of cat urine. There had never been any animals kept or found in my shop. The lights didn't work. As I investigated, I found that the reason the lights didn't work also explained the sounds of glass breaking. All of the light bulbs in the basement were broken. All 9 incandescent bulbs had been broken in their sockets, and 10 4-foot fluorescent tubes were lying shattered on the floor. I did not find an intruder, however. I should also add that there was only one entrance to the basement. It would have been impossible for anyone to leave without meeting me head-on. I went back up to speak with my salesperson, but she had left. She never returned to work after having been with me for 2 years. She refuses to discuss the incident to this day. I never thought of relating the events of that day to anything having to do with the cabinet. Then, things got worse. As I already indicated, I had decided to give the cabinet to my mother as a birthday gift. About 2 weeks after I made the purchase, I decided to get started refinishing it. I was surprised to find that the cabinet has a unique little mechanism. When you open one of the doors, the mechanism causes the opposite door and the little drawer below to open at the same time. It is very well made. Inside the cabinet, I found the following items: 1/1928 U.S. wheat penny, 1/1925 U.S. wheat penny, one small lock of blonde hair bound with string, one small lock of black/brown hair bound with string, one small granite statue engraved and gilded with Hebrew letters. I have been told that the letters spell out the word shalom, one dried rosebud, one golden wine cup, one very strange black cast iron candlestick holder with octopus legs. I saved all of the items in a box, intending to return them to the estate. The family has refused the items, so they will be included in this sale of the cabinet. After opening the cabinet, I decided not to refinish it. I cleaned it and rubbed in some lemon oil. It was at this time that I noticed that there was an inscription in Hebrew carved into the back of the cabinet. I have no idea what it says or if it is significant. I have included a picture of that inscription below. On my mother's birthday, October 28, 2001, my mother called to tell me that she was going out of town with my sister for 3 days, and we postponed celebrating her birthday together until she returned. On October 31st, 2001, my mother came to my shop. We were going to have lunch together, but before we were going to leave, I gave her the wine cabinet. She seemed to like it. While she examined it, I wanted to make a phone call. I hadn't been out of sight more than 5 minutes when one of my employees came running into my office saying that something was wrong with my mom. When I went back to see what the matter was, I found my mom sitting in a chair beside the cabinet. Her face had no expression, but tears were streaming down her cheeks. No matter how I tried to get her to respond, she would not. She could not. It turns out that my mother had suffered a stroke. She was taken to the hospital by ambulance. She ended up suffering partial paralysis and losing her ability to speak and form words. She has since regained the ability to speak. She could understand things being said to her and could respond by pointing to letters of the alphabet to spell out words she wanted to say. When I asked her the following day how she was doing, she teared up and spelled out the words, NOGFT. I assured her that I had given her a gift for her birthday, thinking that she didn't remember, but she became even more upset and spelled out the words, HATGIFT. I laughed and told her not to worry. I told her I was sorry she didn't like the cabinet and that I would get her anything she wanted if she would promise to get well soon. Still, I didn't associate anything that had happened with the cabinet itself or anything paranormal. Frankly, I don't think I ever even used the term paranormal until this last month. I'll try to make this short now. I gave the cabinet to my sister. She kept it for a week, then gave it back. She complained that she couldn't get the doors to stay closed and that they kept coming open. There are no springs in the door mechanism, and I have never found that the doors come open. I gave it to my brother and his wife, who kept it for 3 days and then gave it back. My brother said it smelled like jasmine flowers, while his wife insisted that it put out an odor of cat urine. I gave it to my girlfriend, who asked me to sell it for her after only 2 days. I sold it the same day to a nice middle-aged couple. 3 days later, when I came to open the shop for the day, I found the cabinet sitting at the front doors with a note that read, "This has a bad darkness." I had no idea what that meant. Anyway, I ended up taking it home. Then, things got even worse. Since the day I brought it home, I began having a strange recurring nightmare. Every time I have the horrible dream, it goes something like this. I find myself walking with a friend, usually someone I know well and trust. At some point in the dream, I find myself looking into the eyes of the person that I am with. It is then that I realize that there is something different, something evil looking back at me. At that point in my dream, the person I am with changes into what can only be described as the most gruesome, demonic-looking hag that I have ever seen. This hag proceeds then to beat the living tar out of me. I have awakened numerous times to find bruises and marks on myself where I had been hit by the old woman during the previous night. Still, I never related the nightmares to the cabinet, nor do I think that I ever would have. About a month ago, however, my sister and my brother and his wife came over to my house and spent the night. The following morning, during breakfast, my sister complained that she had had a horrible nightmare. She said that she recalled having had it a couple of times before and went on to describe my nightmare exactly to the last detail. My brother and his wife froze as they listened, and then chimed in that they had both had the exact same dreams during the night as well. The hair was standing up on the back of my neck and still is. As we talked, it became clear that the common denominator was that each of us had the nightmare during the times that the cabinet was in our respective homes. I called my girlfriend and asked if she could recall having any nightmares recently. She described the same nightmare, same hag, everything. When I asked her if she remembered the date when she had the nightmare, she said she did not. Then I asked if it happened to be the night before she gave me the cabinet back to sell for her. She said, yeah. Hey, how did you know that? Now then, since my family discussion, it seems like all hell is breaking loose. For a week afterward, I started seeing what I can only describe as shadow things in my peripheral vision. In fact, numerous visitors to my house have claimed that they have seen these shadow things. I put the cabinet in an outside storage unit and was awakened when the smoke alarm in the unit went off in the middle of the night. When I went to see what was burning, I opened the door and didn't see any smoke. However, I did get hit with the smell of cat urine. When I went back inside, the smell was there in my house. I do not own a cat, and I never have. I went back outside and grabbed the cabinet. I brought it back inside and tried to research it on the internet. While I was surfing the net, I fell asleep and once again had the same freaking nightmare. I woke up at around 4:30 a.m. when it felt and smelled like someone was breathing on my neck, to find that my house now smelled like jasmine flowers, and just in time to see a huge shadow thing go loping down the hall away from me. I would destroy this thing in a second, except I really don't have any understanding of what I may or may not be dealing with. I am afraid, and I do mean afraid, that if I destroy the cabinet, whatever it is that seems to have come with the cabinet may just stay here with me. I have been told that there are people who shop on eBay that understand these kinds of things and specifically look for these kinds of items. If you're one of these people, please buy this cabinet and do whatever you do with a thing like this. Help me. You can see that I have no reserve price or minimum bid. If I can make things any easier, let me know, and I will do everything within my abilities. One more note. On the same day my mom had her stroke, the lease to my store was summarily terminated without cause. The measurements are 12.5 x 7.5 x 16.25. All of the items that I originally found inside the cabinet are included in the sale and will be delivered with the cabinet. On June 12th, 03 at 2:15 and 30 seconds Pacific Daylight Time, seller added the following information. There is no way that I can respond to all of the emails I've received since I put this thing online. I'll try now to update and answer the most common questions I've been receiving. No, I'm not religious. No, I do not wish to have or participate in any sort of exorcism or case study or photo sessions at my home. No, I will not sell any of the individual pieces which were originally found separate from the other pieces in the cabinet. No, I do not speak Hebrew, nor do I know what the word Kesselim means. I don't know that the word is even a Hebrew word. At the end of the auction, I have decided to take an opportunity to speak with the winning bidder for two reasons. A, to make sure that the winning bidder is a serious adult who has employed some valid reasoning skills in making the decision to accept whatever this is. I will not be judgmental. Do whatever you want or need after the sale. B, to offer full details of the events that have transpired. After I have carried out those responsibilities, and upon payment, I will have the cabinet and its contents delivered by U.S. mail, FedEx, or UPS to the winning bidder. At that point, I will have no further involvement with the matter in any way, shape, or form. Period. 6. To all of you who have offered to pray, I may not be religious, but I am certainly open to the possibilities, no matter what your religion might be. Thank you. On June 14th, 03 at 5:21 and 6 seconds Pacific Daylight Time, seller added the following information. Here is another update for everyone following this listing. No, I will not circumvent or make any deals outside of eBay, even for more money than the final auction price. If you want to win the auction and have the kind of money some of you are offering, there shouldn't be any reason why you cannot simply place your bid in an open, honest fashion. I'm sure you can understand why I might be suspicious. Also, for those of you who want to know if I'm still experiencing anything out of the ordinary, I thought everything was going okay until I got home on Friday, the 13th of June, and found that the fish in my freshwater aquarium, all 10, were dead. I'm still hoping that all of this is coincidental crap. Howl beneath the pines. There are things in this world, dark things that the mind cannot fully process, and so it blocks it out or fills in the gaps. Things that terrify us to our deepest foundations. These things are the reason that humanity fears the darkness. Because the dark is where these things dwell, where they thrive. And there are people who deny that those things are real. That something so terrifying can exist on the same plane as we do. These people are blind fools. I know this because I have seen one of these horrible things. And I was lucky to survive the experience. My friend and my brother, however, were not. It happened the summer that I turned 17. My brother, Caleb, and I had planned a camping trip up north at our grandfather's old hunting cabin. The old man had left it to our father when he died several years back. And even though our relationship with dear old dad wasn't the best after he and mom's divorce, we loved the old cabin. We spent at least one weekend up there every summer. It was in a gorgeous wooded area that we had been exploring since we were little. So we were planning to go spend the weekend up there, just me, my brother, and our childhood best friend, Mira. If I had known then what I know now, I would have vetoed the whole thing. So hard it would make their head spin. But you know what they say about hindsight. So that Friday, we packed all of our gear into my brother's beat-up pickup and left for the cabin. It took us a 4-hour drive to get up to the place, but it was so worth it. By mid-afternoon, we were unpacking the essentials and getting ready to go fishing out at the old creek about a mile back in the woods. It was on the way out to the creek that we found what would later turn out to be the first sign of something being seriously wrong. Caleb was a few yards ahead of me and Mira as we were quietly chatting. He stopped and called back to us, his gaze on something off the side of the somewhat overgrown trail. "Hey, Lena, Mira, come see this." He pointed to whatever had caught his attention. We stopped talking and caught up to him. I followed his pointing hand out to a lump of something laying in the tall grass. I squinted and looked closer. It was a deer, a dead, rotted-out corpse of a doe. It had been there for some time, because there wasn't even the smell of rotting meat to accompany the poor dead creature. "Ew," Mira said, a little disgust in her voice. My curiosity was piqued, though. "I'm going to check it out," I stated, settling my fishing pole against a tree and the tackle box beside it. I stepped through the tall grass and a couple of sticker bushes, approaching the deer. See, I collected the skulls of different animals. I already had 2 buck skulls, antlers and all, but I didn't have a doe. As I came around the corpse, I found something interesting. All of its insides were gone, not slowly decomposed into the ground, but completely gone. I noticed something on the doe's exposed ribs. I looked closer. All along the ribs and other bones there were teeth marks. A shiver ran down my spine, but I ignored it. I thought that the doe must have died and a coyote or some other scavenger had found its body and made a good meal of it. Even the skull had scrapes and gouges from birds pecking at it. So it was useless to me. I didn't bother looking closer, but I should have. "Find anything for your creepy-ass bone collection?" Caleb asked as I stepped back onto the trail. Nah, something got at it already. There are marks all over the bones. I told him as I picked up my fishing gear. We continued on to the lake after that, all thoughts of the deer going out of my head. For the rest of the day, up until the sun started set, we sat on the bank of the creek, fishing. Caleb and I had gotten into a friendly competition to see who could catch more fish. Mira won. We headed back to the cabin, Mira carrying the cooler full of live fish. The whole way back, I had this creepy feeling on the back of my neck, like I was being watched. I just ignored it, thinking it was nothing. By the time we got back to the cabin, it was getting pretty dark, so we put the fish cooler in the truck bed and headed inside. We had a fire in the fireplace, and our sleeping bags set up on the old camp cots in no time. We had a dinner of fire-roasted hot dogs and pork and beans from a can. The whole time we were joking back and forth, and at one point we even devolved into throwing bits of charred hot dog at each other. By the time I went to bed, it was pretty late. We were all tired. I'm pretty sure we all passed out pretty quick. I know that 1 minute I was snuggling into my sleeping bag, and the next it was lights out. I started awake some time later. I don't know what woke me up, but whatever was had the hair on the back of my neck standing up. I lay there for a few minutes, listening hard. At first all I heard was Myra's soft breathing and Caleb's muffled snoring over in the corner. Then I heard it. There was something moving around outside. I could hear it shuffling through the grass and pawing at the ground. After a minute, it seemed to fade away. I relaxed, figuring that it was a stray dog or a coyote. I drifted back to sleep. The next morning, I was woken up to the sound of Caleb yelling outside. I jerked awake and scrambled out of my sleeping bag, tripping over a disoriented Mira, who was attempting the same thing in the process. We both managed to untangle ourselves and make it out the door in time to see my brother throwing a piece of broken plastic into the big trash can we kept up here. It was a piece of our broken fish cooler. There were pieces of it strewn around the back of the truck, and what was left of it sat on the ground by the truck. The lid was gone, and chunks had been taken out of the side. There was a large puddle of water that had soaked into the ground, making it a muddy mess around the cooler. Of the fish, there was nothing left but blood stains and a few bits of torn flesh and bone. It clicked that whatever had woken me up last night had probably been the culprit. Seeing how the cooler was completely destroyed, that meant it was most likely a bear. And the huge footprints that were all over the mud seemed to add to that theory. So we all helped clean up the mess, and then went to have breakfast. I was glad that all of our other food was in the cabin. After we finished eating and cleaning up from breakfast, we decided we were going to go for a hike. It was decided that we would stick together, since the bear may still be in the vicinity. So we all got dressed and ready to go hiking up the trail behind the house. I got dressed in my favorite dark gray cargos and a blue tank top. I had my gray hoodie tied around my waist and my well-loved hiking boots on. A few months back, there had been a safety thing at school, and all of us had decided that we would wear something neon just in case we got separated. My color was neon yellow, so I had a neon yellow hat on, my blonde ponytail sticking out the back. Mira had a pair of black joggers leggings with neon orange reflective stripes down the side and a matching jacket over an orange tank top printed with a large rainbow owl. And my brother was wearing his own cargos in dark green with a bright blue hoodie. He had a reflective blue armband and a blue hat to match. We all packed a backpack with trail snacks, bottled water, a few other useful things, and our own emergency kits. The kits were another product of the safety course. They contained an LED flashlight each with extra batteries, waterproof matches, an emergency knife with a whistle, a compass, and a small mirror in the handle. All set, we headed up the mountain. About an hour and we made it to a spot that we all liked. It was an outcropping of rock that had enough space for us to sit down and enjoy a snack. The view here was incredible. After we rested and caught our breath, we kept going. It was around 3 p.m. when we made it up to the spot we usually hike to. It was a spot next to the creek where there was a set of small waterfalls that dropped down into a small pool before narrowing out and flowing down the mountain to the spot we liked fishing. Usually we would stay for a while and enjoy the view, but today there was a nasty surprise waiting for us. As we parted the trees and stepped into the clearing, we were all hit with the smell of something dead that had just begun to decompose. Laying next to the creek was the half-eaten body of a raccoon. It was turned so that we could just see its insides spilling onto the ground. Its little face was turned towards us, its eyes swollen and bulging. Mira turned and retched into the brush at the edge of the clearing. Caleb made a disgusted sound, and I turned away, unable to stand the sight. As soon as Mira was able to control her heaving stomach, we all three turned and headed back down the mountain without a word. We were halfway back to the rock outcropping, the sun just starting to set to the left of us, when we heard something out in the trees. It was shuffling around, and it seemed to be following us. Wordlessly, we all picked up the pace. We didn't stop at our rock, we just headed straight back to the cabin. Our follower was still there. We could hear it crunching through the underbrush, tracking us all the way down the mountain. It was almost dark by now. At this point, we were all pretty scared. Mira and I were holding hands, while Caleb rushed us along ahead of him. He had pulled his knife from his bag and had it ready. We made it to the trailhead and around the back of the cabin. We made it to the door just in time. Whatever had been following a distance behind us broke the cover of the trees and was sprinting around the cabin. Mira was already inside, and I was stepping through the door when Caleb shoved me into the room and slammed the door shut behind him. He dropped the bar that served as a lock into place and braced his back against it. We were all scared out of our wits, but I think we all almost pissed ourselves in sheer terror when the thing on the other side of the door scratched against it and let out a high-pitched whine. It pawed the door again a few times before it gave up. We heard it retreat, but none of us moved for what felt like hours, but was probably just a few minutes. Mira was the first to move, getting up from where she had been sitting against the wall with her knees drawn up to her chest. She slowly shifted up and peeked out the lone window. I really wish she hadn't. She dropped to the ground again quickly, tears of pure terror streaming down her face. She mouthed something to my brother and I. Wolf! There was a wolf outside, waiting. She slowly crawled over to us. Her blue eyes were wide and filled with fear. She hugged me, and I held her, feeling her shaking like a leaf. It's a huge wolf, she whispered, and it's staring right at the door, just sitting there watching. She started sobbing. I held her and shushed her crying. Caleb wrapped his arms around us both and laid his head on my shoulder. We sat there, all of us, scared to death and shaking. None of us dared move. We hadn't heard it leave, so we all knew that it was still there, watching, waiting for us. It was then that I realized that it had been there all along. It had been watching us from the first day, and it had been what had gotten at the fish. And now it was after us. A chill ran through me at the realization. No sooner than I thought that then an unearthly howl split the air. It was loud enough that the window rattled, and we all had to cover our ears. Hot tears pricked my eyes. I was so afraid in that moment that seemed to last an eternity. Myra's scream shattered the moment, this being the last straw for her. Fear lanced through me again, a fresh wave of icy terror. I don't quite remember exactly what happened next. Just that suddenly she was up and running to hide, and then there was a horrible shriek as the wolf tore through the door. Caleb was dragged back and out of my arms, screaming, and the sound of snarling and growling followed. Something hot and wet splattered over my back, and I fell, trying desperately to claw my way into the cabinet where the firewood was kept. Then it was back and tearing through the door. It slammed into me, and a white-hot pain tore through my shoulder as its teeth sunk into me. In that moment, I could perceive everything. Its weight on my back, huge paws holding me down and cracking two of my ribs, blood pouring from my shoulder, its teeth buried in my flesh, muscle, and bones, and the putrid scent of its breath, like something long dead and rotting. And then it was gone. All I felt was agony. I could distantly hear someone screaming, but it seemed so far away. I think I passed out then. For a moment. Anyway, the next thing I knew was being dragged across the floor by my pant leg. There was something shiny in my field of vision, and in my delirious state, I reached out and wrapped my fingers around it. A knife, my brother's knife. And just like that, everything snapped back into place. My grip tightened on the hilt of the knife, and I turned. The wolf had me by the leg, dragging me to the door. There was blood everywhere, and Mira lay across the room, her body torn apart. She was already dead. I reared up and slashed the knife down at the monster that had a hold of me. The knife arched down and sunk into a huge golden eye. The wolf dropped me, and I yanked the knife free as the beast backed away, whipping its head from side to side. I scrambled to my feet and lunged forward, furious. I slashed at the beast over and over, stabbing and slashing, driving it back. It yelped when the blade connected. I kept slashing, fury and fear both driving my hand until the blade lodged in the creature's neck and snapped free of the hilt. The monster wolf fell, eyes locked on me, wheezing and gurgling as blood poured out of its ruined eye and a few other wounds. I dropped to my knees, panting. The thing that had been hunting us since we arrived dropped, and its breathing slowed as its lifeblood poured from close to a dozen deep wounds until finally, with one last rattle, it breathed no more. I curled in on myself, the fear of moments ago being replaced with a deep sadness and pain. The beast was dead, but so was my brother and my best friend. I let out a low moan, tears running renewed down my blood-stained cheeks. And then the world went black. I woke up in the hospital. It turned out that when we hadn't called our parents that night, as we promised we would, they had called the police. The two officers had driven up to the cabin and found my brother completely torn apart out front. And they had found Myra's body and me in the cabin. I was barely alive. I had lost a lot of blood from the attack. But the police officer who had explained everything to me had asked me something that made my blood run cold. He asked me who the man that had been found in the cabin with us, stabbed to death, had been. I told him I didn't know. They released me from the hospital a few days later. I never went back up to the cabin. I'm too afraid to face what happened there. Too afraid to face what I have become. There are nights that I dream of running in the moonlight, hunting down poor defenseless creatures and sinking my teeth into their flesh, their blood sweet and tangy on my tongue. There are nights that I wake up covered head to toe in dirt and grass, and blood, the taste of copper in my mouth. So now I believe in the things that live in darkness, horrible things that send you fleeing in terror. And I know that they are real. I know because now I am one of them. And I fear the night that I dream of hunting down some poor person and tearing into them. I fear it more than anything. And I fear the day that I don't fear it anymore. The day that I become a real monster. Ash of the End. The last storm was already on the horizon when I woke that Sunday morning. It hung in the south, a solid black wall of dust, churning and seemingly motionless. I'd every intention of sleeping late into the morning, as had been my Sunday custom since Rachel and the girls had left, but the distant rumbling and crackle of lightning drugged me from the bed just after sunrise. I shuffled drowsily around the farm in the early morning, lashing the doors of the barn, rounding up the two stubborn hogs, and shuttering the windows. But soon I found myself rooted in place, captivated by the writhing shape in the sky. It stretched impossibly wide across the open sky, rolling across the border from Kansas. The air had a dry, electric chill, and already the sickly yellow wheat swayed in anticipation. I was in a trance, eyes locked on the distance when I saw a small light dust plume to the west, picked out in stark contrast with black beyond. The horse and rider at the base of the little dust devil approached the farm at a sharp trot, and my dust-bleary eyes registered the silhouette. Nathan Griggs had owned the farm next to mine for as long my family has been in the Dakotas. I grew up with his great booming laughter warming our home nearly every night. His usual broad, yellowing smile was absent beneath recently trimmed mustache and broad-rimmed black hat. His dark suit was blotted with fine layer of grit that he brushed absently at. Caleb. His voice was tired and small as he looked down at me. No church today. I hadn't been in months, and he'd once admitted to envying me. I just didn't see the need any longer, and I've relished the extra hours. I ignored the question. What's troubling you, Nathan? Eliza all right? I asked. He turned towards the south, to the storm, and sucked loudly on his lower lip. After a few moments of thought, he sighed deeply with a phlegmy rumble. The Whitlocks are dead. All of them, except Simon, he said evenly, not returning his gaze to mine. I drank this in for a moment, feeling the insides, my sinuses beginning to burn in the cold and arid breeze. I briefly dwelled upon the image of the youngest Whitlock, a tow-headed toddler with a dim-looking smile I'd seen at the general store with Simon and Irene a few days prior. Ow! I asked finally. He grimaced slightly, still gazing south. Simon's missing. No one's seen him since last night. Irene and the kids are dead, and Simon's gone. It don't sound good. Nathan slumped forward a little, and I saw, not for the first time, how old he was. The whole hornet's nest is stirred up over in Riverdon. He was gonna lose the farm, they say. Fleetingly, it concerned me that I could easily see the connection between these facts. Eliza's fine, he said after another silent moment. Just a little ill this morning, thanks for asking. He broke from the black clouds and fixed his eyes on me. He offered a pale imitation of his familiar smile, but his eyes remained squinted tight, haunted. He looked as if he had more to say, but at last, he just nodded and gathered the reins. Be safe, Caleb, he said, a phrase worn smooth by repeated use, and turned towards his farm, trotting quickly, head still crooked towards the storm. By noon, I could only watch as it reached up and blotted out the sun. The dust storm enveloped us, obscuring the sky like the hands of God. I did my best to ration the allotment of bourbon I'd poured off that morning, watching the black wind scour the earth through a broken shutter slat. During the storms of the years before, pale and weak compared to this tempest, Rachel would huddle with the girls to read scripture, inevitably ending with the revelations in hushed, reverent tones. I tried not to scowl at her fear and awe before, but now I could feel a little tremor of doubt in me as I looked out at the sackcloth sky. When the sky darkened a few shades at nightfall, I prepared a small meal of bread and fried eggs and drained the rest of the bourbon. Later, I laid in the unmade bed with the world spinning and the sky howling outside and tried not to think. The storm raged stronger than ever the next morning, the sun winking through the maelstrom, a fat circle of hazy orange like a fading coal. Late in the day, it showed no sign of abating, and I resigned to leave the house, if only to feed the animals. I tied my goggles to my head and a damp bandana around my mouth, but I still gasped at the ragged burn of the dust when I stepped outside into the storm. The lining of my throat seemed to crack and bleed within moments. I could barely see the barn, but I set out instinctually towards it. A tall hillock of fine black dust was pressed to the side, and it took me a few kicks to clear the door. The dust had seeped in everywhere, and the hogs and cows were covered in a layer of grime. They stood still in their pens, eyes red and glassy, shuddering and jerking with each loud creak from the roof beams. They ignored the food. There was a twisting coil of anxiety in my chest when Nathan arrived, leading the terrified horse behind him. His beard was matted with dust, and he had to sweep the lenses of the goggles clean at my doorstep. But instead of entering, he only waved me out to join him. "You need to come with me," he shouted over the storm. The dust between his teeth had formed a thin black mud that flecked at the corners of his mouth. It was his tone, flat and even, that terrified me. I didn't argue, but pulled on goggles and offered him a second bandana. I followed close behind him, one hand on the horse's haunch. Nathan picked his way down the path, navigating by some uncanny memory of the curves in the little road. We walked cautiously and deliberately west for the better part of half a mile, past Nathan's own farm, towards the leaning shape of the Crane farm. A throbbing dread began to stir my breast as we approached. The door was thrown wide open and off one of its hinges, swinging violently in the wind. I could see Harold Crane, slumped in the door frame, the congealing blood on his forehead caked with the fine dirt. His eyes were open. The left eye beneath the bullet hole was flooded red and tilted wildly skyward. Clutched in his curled hands was a rifle with one spent casing. Margaret Crane and her youngest were inside, curled tightly around each other in the corner of the room. The flowers of blood that bloomed on the fabric of their dresses was bright and vivid. Slumped upright at the dinner table, as if ready for a meal, was another figure, filthy and caked with black dust. He seemed composed, sitting upright and proud, despite the pinprick bullet hole, clean and bloodless, standing starkly in the center of his throat. His grimy skin was dried and shriveled. His eyes were closed, the lids sunken over the pits. It took a long, yawning moment to recognize the desiccated face. Simon Whitlock, hands clasped around a little revolver, looking for all the world like he'd been dead for a week. Simon Whitlock, grinning obscenely wide, showing dried black gums. Despite the roaring storm, there was an unearthly stillness in the little house, and I could hear my heart thudding in my ears. I turned to Nathan with pitiful expression, a plea for some sort of understanding. I was bringing them some canned food. Harold was worried about being able to last out a long store. He shouted from the front porch, where he was closing Harold's eyes and wiping the blood from his hand. He looked up at me and stood. Noah's missing. I gazed around the room again, before turning to Nathan. You don't think that Noah, I began, letting the idea remain unsaid. Noah was a quiet and sickly kid, but something about him had always set my teeth on edge. No, he barked. I don't think a 15-year-old could be capable of this. But I didn't think Simon was either. None of this makes any sense. He brushed the lenses of his goggles clean once more. No, it does not. I agreed. We should head in a river to tell someone, but I need you to drive the Cranes forward. I can make it between our 3 farms on foot reliably enough, but I don't think me or that horse could make it all the way into town. Nathan looked mildly embarrassed, hidden as he was behind dust and beard, and I followed him a barn. The Model A made a few grinding rasps before dying completely, refusing to respond to anything. When I opened the gas cap, a damp and clumping mixture of dust and gasoline tumbled from the little opening. My breath came in increasingly shallow gasps as we moved to the Crane's tractor, unscrewing the cap. The same reeking clay was stuffed to the top of the tank. The walk back towards our farms was silent, my heart pounding as I struggled to keep my breathing steady as the inside of my sinuses were scoured raw. First Nathan's tractor, then we checked mine. Both were useless and clogged with dust. If Nathan was as panicked as I was, he refused to show it. Caleb, I don't know what this means, he yelled to me as we crouched over my tractor, the sky dimming. But I think I'd appreciate it if you stayed with me and Eliza tonight. The storm has to let up in the morning, I'm sure. I could see at last the spark of fear in his eyes, and it brought me a little solace. Nathan went ahead, panicky with thoughts of Eliza, sick in bed on her own, and I agreed to follow shortly. I entered my house to gather my shotgun and a tin of coffee. I don't believe I intended to start drinking, but the bloody and crooked I was shining wetly in my memory, and I drew from the bourbon a few soothing pulls. I recall being tired and weary from the day's grim business, but I don't remember lying down on the cool wood of the floor. When I woke, gripping the gun, an empty bottle, the sky was lighter, but the whirling black cloud still surrounded the world on all sides. Tuesday, I thought through a fog of pain. Or is it Wednesday? I groggily allowed the shame to flood in when I realized I'd left Nathan and Eliza waiting all night. After finding all the water drained the night before, I dressed for the storm and headed out to the well. The pump handle strained against me as I pressed downward, bringing up the first sounds of water. What came out of the pump was black and viscous, a thin black paste. I dropped the tin bucket in disgust, feeling yesterday's dread igniting behind the alcohol ache, and I turned quickly towards Nathan's farm. On the road, with my destination not yet visible, I turned to see behind me. There wasn't even the faint outline of my barn. In that moment, I was alone, surrounded by a wall of vibrating earth and wind on all sides. It could have been all of creation, and I would never know. It could be the end of creation, and I would never know. I turned back towards Nathan's farm and began to run in a panic, frantically hoping I had not altered direction. As the small, unpainted house came into view, I saw Nathan's horse, lying motionless on the ground, still tied to the railing on the porch. A small dune of black dust had formed against one side. The door was wide open, slamming into the wall with a sharp crack at each breath from the storm. My panic spiked like a fever when I stepped inside, and my body began shaking violently. Eliza lay spilled from her bed, trailing sheets and a shredded fragment of her nightgown. Her head was twisted, the neck bruised and bent, and bulging glassy eyes seemed to stare directly at me. Her tongue was thick and black between her teeth. Seated on the bed above her, spindly legs dangling over the edge, was the dried and leathery corpse of Noah Crane, the missing boy. His eye sockets gaped empty and black as he silently grinned out at the world. Nathan was nowhere to be found. I backed out quietly from the house, at last truly tuning out the chaotic roar of the storm. My mind spun trying to make sense of utter madness, and it stoked the fires inside me. Panting, desperate dread flooding my limbs until I found myself propelled blind, running through the storm towards my home. I continued past the hulking silhouette of my barn, legs flooding with fire as I sucked in great lungfuls of choking dust. I thought nothing of destination. I only wanted to get as far away from the storm as possible, far from the empty charnel houses of my neighbors, and from empty eyes and wicked grins. I made it as far as Thin Fork of the Redwater River that carves the far edge of my land. I saw, through the wall of shifting haze, the black outline of the river from a distance. When I approached, legs slowing and lungs burning, I saw the river more clearly, wide and unearthly still. The water was black and thick, and in mute disbelief, I watched it flow, slowly like molasses, under a dark and churning sky. And then I began to understand. I nailed the shutters closed, driven by an animal urgency of purpose. The door I braced with Rachel's heirloom cabinet, allowing it to crack and splinter on its side as I stacked a steamer chest on top. I didn't really believe that this would slow whatever would come tonight in the howling darkness, but I wanted to have the time to know, to be sure. The last bourbon bottle lay empty on the floor, and I was glad for this, for the chance to be clear-headed at last. I sat back to the wall, facing the door with the shotgun in my hands, and I waited. The sky darkened, and the storm continued to howl. I measured my breaths, trying to hold on to that moment of calm, to stretch it out until it dried and snapped apart. It was late at night when it arrived. I could hear the heavy footsteps circling the porch, pulling lightly, testing each shutter. My hands were suddenly slick with sweat on the barrel of the shotgun. The shuffling footsteps stopped in front of the door, and I saw the wood flex ever so slightly as pressure was applied. A scraping sound began to rise, hissing from the small barricade as it began to slide slowly across the floor. The force on the other side of the door increased slowly, steadily, grinding against the heavy barricade until the door was open to the storm and to the night and beyond. The figure swept into the room with a silent grace that surprised me and stood regarding me. Nathan's skin seemed to crackle and go taut like paper as he moved, and in the hollow of his empty eyes were tiny twisting clouds of dust, blue ribbons of electricity arcing across the sockets. He was smiling, a smile I'd never seen from him, a wide obscene grin. I felt a strange sort of calm then, the surety of knowing despite the impossible madness of it all. I raised the shotgun. "Caleb," the thing inside Nathan hissed in a voice like grinding sand. The corpse took another step towards me, and I saw a black trickle of mud from the edge of its cracked lips. "Go ahead and shoot, Caleb. See what it gets you." I smiled back at him, seeing the solution so clearly at last. I took a moment to be thankful that Rachel and the girls are gone, thankful, in an awful way, that I'd struck her hard enough for her to finally leave me. This would not be the night that they die. It had moved halfway across the room now, shuffling towards me, the malevolent sparks of its eyes locked on me. The now familiar dread reared up to swallow my temporary peace. I saw, in the black whirlpool of its eyes, the great storm covering the entire earth in a final gloom. I saw trails and chains of endless murder and atrocity crisscrossing the darkened world into that last eternal night. I saw the end. All I had left was a little sliver of hope, enough to spur me onward. I swung the shotgun up under my chin, feeling the cool of the barrel on my skin. The thing inside Nathan jerked to a halt and ceased to smile, and I knew I'd gambled right this time. It needed me, and it can't have me. I made sure I was smiling, drinking in the thing's rage and frustration. The thing roared, and with a leap, burst for Nathan's body, his drying muscles snapping and shredding into long, fraying fibers as it shed him like a coat, thudding to the floor behind. It was a swirling cloud, a flurry of dust, coursing with lightning and pure, elemental hatred that I saw then, surging toward me faster than I would have believed possible. Thin tendrils coiled and tightened and wound their way through air, twisting toward my mouth and nose. I could feel them caress the raw passages of my lungs, hot, twisting, and unmistakably, horribly alive as they slid into me. I pulled the trigger. The Black Resin. I was 9 when it happened. I grew up in a small town of about 800 people along the south side of the Rocky Mountains. Our town was surrounded by forest, and during the summer, it was the location for our greatest adventures as children. The older kids would accompany us, either for entertainment or at the very least a sense of responsibility to keep us from a bear's jaws. I wish it had been a bear's jaws. When I moved to the town, I was only 6 years old, and thankfully transitioning from the city life of Vancouver to the rural life of the mountains was easier because of that. My mother introduced me to our neighbor Ethan, who was already 7. We instantly bonded. He was brash and daring, and could always convince me to join him on magical quests through our yards, chasing dragons and monsters. He always insisted on making me the damsel in distress, but I'd always make sure I still got one of his duct tape and cardboard swords in case I too needed to vanquish a beast. A year later, we started a play in the forest. First only at the edges, darting in and out of trees, making sure our houses were always in view. It was because I was nervous at first. My mom had always warned me about bears. Then during his short visits home, my dad would tell me frightening stories from his logging job. Stories about vicious mountain lions and spiders that could kill you before you even noticed their bite. It was this nervousness that kept us on the fringe of the forest for the first few months. Then there was the snow and the danger of falling into a tree well and slipping on the slick ground of the fresh melt. By the end of spring, though, I could tell Ethan was getting antsy to enter the forest. I finally complied, on the condition we went with the other kids. I think he was a bit jealous. It had always just been us two playing, but his curiosity about the forest depths won him over. The first time we went in, it was bright and sunny, and light filtered through the leaves in a soft green hues, dotted with areas of inky black shade where the leaves and branches were too thick to let the early summer sun through. We were playing tag, and had been given 60 seconds to hide. I had played like this with Ethan, and immediately found one of these inky spots so that I could scramble up its tree. In a few moments, I was mostly concealed at the bottom branches, the pine needles and rough bark scraping at my knees and hands. I heard a scramble above me and looked up to see one of the older kid's little sisters. She was only 3 branches above me and held a finger to her lips. I nodded and looked back out into the clearing. I held a bated breath as I heard giggling approaching us. Watching silently from the branches, I saw that most of the kids had already been found, but if I had counted right at the beginning, there were still 3 of us hiding. I would have been able to keep my spot too, but at that moment a drop of sap fell onto the back of my neck, startling me and causing me to lose my footing. In a long second, I was lying on the spongy forest floor, a bit roughed up, but okay. The eyes of the group's eldest widened, and he jumped back before quickly moving to my side and helping me up. I was fine and ready to help find the last few. It only took us a minute to find Ethan. He had hidden only 2 trees away, and he blamed me for making him move when he saw me fall. I just punched him in the arm. Half an hour later, though, due to my silly sense of honor to not share her position, my group had not found the girl. Because it was getting dark, the leader began to call out for her, and I quickly brought them to the tree we'd been hiding in. She's a couple branches above where I was. I pointed up to the west side of tree before cupping my hands to my mouth and hollering up, "Hey, game's over. Come on." There was no response, only the light swaying of the tree's branches in the evening breeze. The older kid, the one who was her older brother, quickly started climbing up, and there was a thick silence while we waited for him to return. The heavy branches and the quickly dimming light left us blind, but for the occasional rustle high above us. In a few minutes that felt like hours, the boy dropped down, landing easily on his feet, jacket noticeably stained in the same inky sap that had fallen onto my neck. I couldn't help but feel jealous about his landing, despite myself. "She's not up there." I circled the whole tree. He turned to me. "She probably thought you would rat her spot out once we walked away." He counted us off. There were 8 of us in total, not including him. He pointed at Ethan and I, and then towards the oldest person. "Take the kids home. If it gets dark, I don't want to get in trouble for getting them hurt. The rest of us will go find her." I looked to Ethan, nervous he would talk back, but in the setting sun and the tense air around our group, he for once seemed frightened into submission. As our guide led us back in silence, the echoed calls of the group faded away, leaving a chill down my spine that I knew was for more than just the insetting brisk air that nighttime brought. I rubbed my hands at my sides and jumped at every rustle as we headed home. In the corners of my eyes, it seemed like the shadows were distorting and the very forest itself seemed to be turning pitch black. Once I was inside of my house, the sun had nearly set, blood-red hues intermingling with flat yellow, creating a sickening sight. I bolted from the group to my doorstep, ignoring the startled call from the older kid. The world felt like it was moving in slow motion as I approached, and every color, every feeling was so vivid that I felt that I might just cease to exist with each step. Images were twisting in my mind, and I felt a heavy sleepiness unlike anything else I had ever experienced. I remember reaching for the doorknob as the world faded to black, only hearing the pounding of my own heart. I woke up 2 days later in a hospital room with a strangled gasp. I had been stuck in a world of pulsating night terrors, and it took me a few moments to come to attention. A doctor must have heard me, because suddenly there was a large hand on my shoulder, gently keeping me laying down as a reassuring voice told me that everything was all right. I cracked my eyes open, not remembering closing them in the first place. My parents entered my vision first, smiling at me. I turned to the hand's owner, a larger man in a white lab coat. "What's wrong with me?" My throat was dry and sore, and my voice came out hoarse. My mother slowly approached me, still smiling. "Oh, sweetie, it's all right. You got scared, and sometimes when people get scared, they have something called a panic attack. Because you're so little, your heart had some trouble keeping up, and you passed out. It's like falling asleep, but not on purpose." Her voice had that odd childlike lilt she used when she thought I didn't understand her. Oh, I would have said more, but the doctor turned to my parents and began talking about medication. In a few more minutes, he and my father left, and my mother took some day clothes out her purse. I realized that I only had a hospital gown on. My mother sat down on the bed next to where I was laying. She wrapped an arm around me affectionately and pulled me close to her. "Oh, sweetie, we were so scared. Thank God you're all right." I said nothing, still unsure about what had happened. It would only be in the following weeks that the night's memories would slowly return to me. My mother must have taken my silence as fear, and she spent the next few minutes consoling me before helping me get out bed and change out of the gown. I was unsteady on my feet, and for the first minute it seemed the world was swaying slightly, but I recovered quickly. Once I was dressed, my parents rushed me through checking out, and I could see their anxiety to get home. There were noticeable bags under their eyes, and my father seemed to yawn after every other sentence. The trip home was silent. The hospital I had been staying in was in a nearby town, about an hour's drive away from home. I watched the trees, trying to spot wildlife as I often did on long car rides. When we had gotten home, my parents allowed me to go to Ethan's, but only on the condition I didn't overexert myself. I didn't know what an exert was or how one would over it, but I agreed readily. Ethan seemed overjoyed to see me and was quick to hand me his sword to play. It only took a few swings before he began to fill me in on what I'd missed. "They didn't find her, you know," he said as he waved his sword at me. I responded by putting up my shield and thrusting my sword back. The girl, yeah, they've even had big search teams out in the woods. They think it was a bear or something. I nearly corrected him on his pronunciation, but I knew it wasn't really the time. Did they see a bear? No, they couldn't find anything. Ryan says she probably disappeared. Ryan would say anything if you would listen. Anyways, now my mom and dad say we can't play outside in the woods anymore. He shook his head, and I giggled because he looked like my dad when he grumbled. "What's so funny? Don't you know what that means?" I took advantage of his outburst to stab his chest with the tip of my sword. He gave a wonderful fake cry and dramatically sunk to his knees, looking to the sky. The fair princess has killed the brave knight that was going to save her. No! He let the end of his no trail on for a few seconds before collapsing on his side and laughing, his previous anger forgotten. "So what does it mean?" I asked, after he had stood back up and our giggles had subsided. "It means," he said with a dramatic sigh, "that we can't play in the forest anymore." Oh, was all I said? I could tell he was upset, but the forest had given me the creeps, and deep down I was quietly relieved. Several more weeks passed, and no child was allowed to enter the forest. I heard that a few of the older kids had snuck in anyway, but they were teenagers, and I guess that means that they could handle themselves. I didn't mind. I was content to play my games with Ethan, but he seemed angry. When he spoke of it, he acted as if it was this great injustice that was being performed only to upset him and no one else. I shouldn't have been surprised when he showed up on my doorstep that evening. He woke me by flinging rocks at my second-story room. I opened my window groggily, and he beckoned for me to come downstairs while raising a finger to his lips. I complied, but I was confused about what he wanted. When I opened the door, I saw he was holding a flashlight in one hand and his cardboard sword in the other. For a moment, I thought he wanted to play with me in the night, which I thought was silly, but at the same time it did seem pretty cool. As I slowly closed the door, cringing when it creaked, he reached out for my hand. As I held it out, he put the flashlight into it and began pulling me towards the road in front of my house. Still thinking he just wanted to play, I followed him. Instead of turning towards his own house, however, he turned towards the forest. Confused, I pulled my hand back. No, wait, there's a bear out there. He turned to glare at me. If there was a bear out there, they would have found it. He paused before stamping his foot against the dark concrete. I'm tired of waiting to play in the forest. He reached out to pull me again. I bet you she just got lost. Unconvinced, I pulled back further. If she was just lost, they would have already found her. I don't want to get hurt, just so we can play hide and seek in the woods. Don't be such a baby. Once we find her, everybody's going to know we're the heroes. Our parents will probably even let us play out on our own. I was frightened and didn't care for being a hero, but Ethan was pretty much my only friend, and I didn't want to lose him. Fine, I conceded. Good. He handed me a pack of batteries as well, just in case the flashlight dies. He held up his sword daringly, and we slowly approached the forest's edge. We had strayed here for so long that the first half-kilometer it was like trekking our own backyards. Once the trees had covered our house, he waved his hand ahead of me, my signal to turn on the flashlight. As we progressed slowly, the darkness of the woods was barely illuminated by the weak light. My arms were covered in goosebumps as the cold air licked up my spine. After what felt like hours, though I now believe it was only minutes, Ethan stopped and motioned to the ground. It's that weird sap they found in the tree. His voice was barely a whisper, pointing at a stain on a fallen branch. Weird sap. I breathed, looking at the oozing black smudge, feeling something nudging a memory in my brain. Yeah, his face was a bit pale, and I was almost relieved he was frightened as well. The tree you were in was covered in it. They couldn't tell what tree it was from, though. I gently hit his shoulder, stopped trying to scare me. I'm not lying. His voice came out as an annoyed whimper. He stood back up and returned to holding his sword heroically. He then raised it above me and opened his mouth to say something, only to turn a shade paler and drop his sword. He turned around. His voice was mumbled, and I could tell he was trying to not move his mouth. I had thought he was still playing with me and trying to get me scared, so I did so quickly only to freeze as well. In front of us was something black. It looked like a goopy mess of maple syrup that had been dyed to look like oil. I didn't want to startle it, and had the flashlight shined at the forest floor, making it difficult to make out any feature other than two large white eyes, empty of feature, staring directly at us from the creature. There was a heavy moment of silence before I whipped back around, grabbing Ethan's hand and yelling for him to run. I must have snapped him out of his daze, because it wasn't long before his pace started to match mine. The thing had been blocking our way home, and we had little choice but to run deeper into the forest, into areas that we had never been to before. I doubted any other human really had. I could hear creaks of branches above me, and when I looked up, I saw the moon was blotted out by an unseen force. The darkness had indeed grown, but I hadn't noticed it in my panic. We ran for several minutes, until even our adrenaline couldn't sustain us. It ended quickly, as Ethan tripped ahead of me, and I heard a crash and a nasty sounding crack. I stopped, fearing the worst, and shined my light on Ethan. I only saw him for a few seconds. His eyes were wide, and he was looking above my head. Around him, there were fragments of some kind of white wood, or at least that's what I thought it was in the short time I could see it. Then Ethan was swallowed by a dark shroud, and all my flashlight illuminated were two large white eyes, only a foot from my face. Fatigue forgotten, I turned around to the now unoccupied path and fled. I reached the edge of the woods more quickly than it had taken to move into them. I had been able to follow our trampled path, and the underbrush had been stomped down by us and no longer could inhibit me. I bounded down the small hill and then down the short street lane to my house, pulling the door open and closing it with a slam before locking it and running to my parents' room. I collapsed on their bed, and over the next few days I would lead a search party through the path Ethan and I had made. We would find a small clearing concealed from above with purposely intertwined branches. In the clearing, my mother would cover my eyes, but not before I saw dozens of skeletons, all identified as missing children over the last 60 years. My eyes were only drawn to one, though, a smaller, nondescript one, hanging from a cedar tree, perfectly put together with a cardboard sword clenched in hand. I collapsed on their bed, and over the next few days I would lead a search party through the path Ethan and I had made. We would find a small clearing concealed from above with purposely intertwined branches. In the clearing, my mother would cover my eyes, but not before I saw dozens of skeletons, all identified as missing children over the last 60 years. My eyes were only drawn to one, though, a smaller, nondescript one, hanging from a cedar tree, perfectly put together with a cardboard sword clenched in hand.
And that was tonight's tale from the Shadowed Tales archive. If it left a mark on your mind, if the silence feels heavier now, then the story did what it was meant to do. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share the darkness. New stories are always on their way. Until then, keep the lights low and the doors locked.